Qualitative Data Formatting and Processing. Unit 27. Contents. Introduction. 27.1 Introduction to 27.2 Qualitative Data Processing and Analysis. Description. Then classification. Then 27.5 Making Connections. 27.6 Theoretical Coding. 27.7 the Qualitative Content Analysis. And 27.8 Conclusion. Learning objectives. It is expected that after reading the Unit 28, you would be able to proceed with data formatting and processing of the field material gathered by you on the topic of your mini research project. In terms of circular process of qualitative analysis as formulated by Ian Dey. 27.1 Introduction. The previous units of this block have familiarized you with some of the key methods of gathering data employed by qualitative researchers. The process of discovery and learning embarked upon whilst gathering data is no doubt an exciting and memorable one. However, there comes a point when field notes and interview pages gathered by you must be formatted, processed, and analyzed. Some of the questions that confront the researcher at this point are: how I can make sense of all this material? How can I organize it to make it meaningful to others and myself? How do I put it all together so as to present a concise and thoughtful formulation of the topic under study? Hardly any researchers would initiate the process of investigations without at least a mental checklist of the type of material that is to be gathered. A systematic listing of the topics to be covered is always very useful. Ellen has mentioned the following three forms of checklist. Checklist encoded in questionnaire forms. Checklist employed in the context of semi-informal interviews. Background checklist for occasional reference and to provide guidelines for research in general. The idea of mentioning this checklist in the introduction of Unit 27 is to remind you that in order to format and process your field material, you need to refer to these checklists to find out if you have actually completed what you had set out to find out. Only after this initial exercise are you to proceed qualitative data processing and analysis. 27.2 Qualitative Data Process and Analysis. The key word of this process entails is analysis. Qualitative analysis requires dialectic between ideas and qualitative data. You may ask, what are qualitative data? For an answer to this question, see box 27.1. Box 27.1 Definition of qualitative data. Qualitative data are materials gathered used field research methods already discussed in Unit 26. Openness and inclusiveness characterize these methods. A researcher applies such methods with the objective of capturing people's lived experience of the world and the meaning they attach to these experiences from their own worldviews. More often than not, collection of qualitative data entails a variety of methods and techniques rather than a single one. The result is that the data types input in depth and unstructured interviews, field notes, unstructured field diaries, personal document, photographs, and so on. Qualitative research in its initial stages mean producing a large mass of data, even though a researcher may have used a relatively smaller sample size. We cannot analyze our qualitative data without ideas, but our ideas must be shaped and tested by the data we are analyzing. You cannot make an omelette without breaking and then beating together the eggs. Analysis also involves breaking down data into bits and then beating them bits together so that the data is resolved into its component and its characteristic elements are revealed. In this sense, you can say that we split data processing into activities, namely checking and converting the data, and the other one is generating metadata, that is like beating the eggs together. So the first activity comprises a checking out of the completeness and quality of data, the relationship between data, for example interviews, field notes, audio and visual recording, etc., and anonymization and B, converting data or of transferring data to a format that is appropriate for dissemination. At this time, apart from checking out the completeness and quality in terms of physical condition, readability, audibility, reusability, a researcher needs to bring to light any problems related to confidentiality and anonymity, reusing, suitability for designation, etc. We have mentioned above the terms and anonymization. Let us explain what this term means. It refers to maintaining the confidentiality of the respondent or any other person or entity. It is important to discuss the level of anonymization you arrive at in your research. In some cases, it is not easy to distinguish the dignity, the identity of the subjects of research without bringing about an unacceptable distortion to the data. This implies that the particular data can hardly be reused for any purpose. The level of anonymization you use for a data set depends upon the nature of the study, and each case has its own unique sets of concern. Here comes in issues of ethical and legal nature with respect to maintaining confidentiality where requested. In practical terms, all this means that you remove all identifiers and replace them with pseudonyms where appropriate. Care should be taken to use same pseudonyms all throughout. It is a strong advice to delete from the data any slanderous or libelous comments. The second processing activity of generating metadata refers to the contextual information that researcher obtains during process. For example, you may create a list of data giving biological inputs that would make it easier to identify the transcript or make sure that the interview and interviewer names and questions, topics, guide headers are put in the place. The main function of this exercise is to make it easier for the researchers to locate transcript or particulars items in a data sheet. See below the section 26.6 for theoretical coding. You will find a definition of metadata types in box 27.2. Further, please note that about digitalization of data, you will read in details in the inputs of block 8, and we will not include this factor in the scope of unit 27. Box 27.2 definition of metadata types. A researcher has to wade through the sea of raw data. In order to make the process of wading easier, it is better to prepare a data list and a catalog of records. In addition, one may also prepare a user guide so that anyone can use the data. These three types of data are called metadata. It is always a good research practice to document one's research and the material produced during field research from its beginning to throughout the analysis. The data list provides the key characteristic of the data. It helps the researcher to identify the specific type of interviews or transcription. For example, in the case of data which are based on a sample interviews with individuals, metadata listing would include their data of birth, gender, employment, geographical locations, and any other key features that the researcher has defined for sampling. How do we carry out the above two processes without getting into a mechanical mode of processing? We need to proceed to analyzing our data. The aim of analysis is not to just description but interpretations, explanation, understanding, and possibly prediction. Descriptions provide the basics for analysis. We then lays the base for further description. We break down our data in order to draw concepts from it, which we then use to classify the data. We draw connections between different concepts, and these connections form the basic of further description. Ian Dey, 1993, presented the following diagram which succinctly represented the circular process involved in qualitative analysis. This is the qualitative analysis. Then we are connecting the data and describing, and we can also classify. This is the circular process of qualitative analysis. Let us briefly consider each of these processes mentioned on the previous page. 27.3 Description. So the first step in qualitative analysis to develop comprehensive descriptions of the phenomena under study. Geets coined the term thick description. Unlike the thin description, which merely states the fact, thick description includes information about the content of an act, intentions and meaning attributed by the actor to the action, and the process in which the action is embedded. Let us briefly dwell on these points. Context. By context, we mean situating the action within the social, cultural, and historical backdrop against which it takes place. Contexts are key to meaning, since meaning is conveyed correctly only if the context is also understood. Intention. In qualitative analysis, there is a strong emphasis in understanding the subjective meaning imbued by actors to the way in which action is organized. Process. The idea of process is linked to that of change. In the focusing process, we shift our attention from context and intention to the consequences of the action. For example, you are probably familiar with the policy of perestroika unleashed by Mikhail Gorbachev in the erstwhile Soviet Union in the mid 1980s. The context was growing disenchantment with its ineffectiveness of the state controls on economy and society. The intention of Gorbachev were probably the creation of a more just liberal order, but the consequences were the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the movement towards the unipolar world order governed by the USA. 27.4 Classification. This involves sorting out our mass of data into classes based on certain characteristics, which will then aid us in the development of a conceptual framework through which the actions and events can be rendered intelligible. You have sure done jigsaw puzzles. Consider your data as hundreds of little bits of the jigsaw, which must be carefully put together so that the resultant pictures gives an accurate representations of the social realities you have studied. How do you assemble the picture? By grouping the bits into like classes. Perhaps all the blue shirts together will form the sky, all green bits, blue bits together will form the sky, all the green bits the forest, and the brown on the earth. And organizing the data into groups based on certain characteristics essentially is the process of categorization. At the stage of writing up your study, the same categories may take the form of index of your books. For indexing, see box 27.3. Categories are the organizing tools which help us to sort out the heap of bits of the jigsaw puzzles according to or relevant characteristic. Classification and categorization should always be guided by the research objectives. The point mentioned above will be taken up in a greater detail when we talk about coding. Box number 27.3 Indexing. There are three elements found in an index: mnemonics, reference, and structure. Mnemonics are short forms of information. References show where you are to find the information, and structure is the arrangement for organizing mnemonics. Most often you may find that categories in mnemonics overlap. In such situations, ideally you would need to put the overlapping pieces of information in both categories. With regards to references, you would require a fair degree of precision for identifying the location of information. You may be taken recourse to modern information technology, see the units in block 8. The structure of mnemonics is usually alphabetical order in substructures. Many categories mentioned in cross-reference to take care of the overlapping information. Making such indexes complete in the above three aspects is of course useful at the stage of data analysis and of writing up the research material. It is also useful if you or someone else was to restudy the same topic in the same region. Let us now discuss briefly about making connections, the third process of Ian Dey's diagram. Figure 27.1, where you see is the making connections. 27.5 Making connections. Describing and classifying are not ends in themselves, but serve as a more important purpose, namely to produce an account for analysis. The concept we develop are like building blocks, which must be connected together with the motor of ideas. We have to look for the association between different variables and try to see the patterns within the data so that we can discern the regularities and also variations and expectations. We can now discuss the subject of coding, but before proceeding to this discussion, let us first complete reflections and action 27.1. Reflections and action 27.1. Read the following excerpt and work out what kinds of data does one requires to understand the rituals in their social context and to grasp their significance for the practitioners of those rituals. Religious behavior does not exclusively depend on religious context, but it's generally a human form of behavior which is realized under the stimulus not of transcendental objects but of their motivations. Even in its autonomy, religious life contains elements that are not specifically religious but social. Only when these elements are isolated by means of the sociological method will they show what within the old complex of religious behavior may legitimately be considered purely religious, that is independent of anything social. You can take help of Victor Thomas article on the aspects of Sora ritual and shamanism. For answering the questions raised above, here Rana has shown the kind of data required and the connection that need to be made in order to understand and explain the phenomena of mysticism, asceticism, conversion, and holy mendicancy in the higher religions. 27.6 Theoretical Coding. In order to analyze our data, we have to read it in an interactive way and constantly ask the questions who, what, when, where, and why. This will open up data for us and help us to think about in a creative way. The process of field material, once it has been gathered, invariably implies hard work for researchers who are inexperienced in handling field data. Many information and communication technology aids are now available to them, and we have discussed them in block 8. Here we will mainly concern with the theoretical coding of field material. The key function of this exercise is to convert the material in the schedules into suitable code form. Coding is considered a tedious and demanding job. Further, this is an area where methods of analysis of qualitative and quantitative data complement and supplement each other. For example, Turner has used the quantitative material about village comparisons in his description of Dembu social structure. Let us now look at some of the techniques and procedures which will help make sense of qualitative data. The first procedure discussed in theoretical coding in order to develop a ground theory. This procedure was introduced by Glaser and Strauss and further elaborated by Glaser, Strauss and Corbin. Coding represents the operations by which the data are broken down, conceptualized and put back together in new ways. A ground theory is a rich, tightly woven explanatory theory that closely approximates the reality it represents. Strauss and Corbin. Analysis in grounded theory comprises 3 major kinds of coding: open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. Let us briefly review each of them, but before you get into the details of coding in grounded theory, it is a good idea to read the box number 27.4 a bit more about grounded theory. 27.4 Grounded theory according to Glaser. The following is a discussion of grounded theory according to Glaser. For more details on grounded theory, see glossary that is placed at the end of book 3 of MSO 2. Goals of grounded theory. The goal of a GT is to formulate hypotheses based on the conceptual ideas that other may try to verify. The hypotheses are generated by constantly comparing conceptualized data on different levels of abstraction, and these comparisons contain deductive steps. Grounded theory does not aim for the truth, but to the conceptualize what's going on using empirical data. GT is thus a systematic generalization of theory from the data that contains both inductive and deductive thinking. In a way, GT resembles what many researchers do when retrospectively formulating new hypotheses to fit data. However, in GT, the researcher does not pretend to have formulated the hypothesis in advance, since preformed hypotheses are prohibited. In most research endeavors, presence or prescience are units of analysis, whereas in GT the units of analysis is the incident. The number of often amounts to several hundreds of grounded theory studies, since every participant normally reports many incidents. When comparing many incidents in a certain area, the emerging concepts and theory relationships are in reality probability statements. Consequently, GT is not a qualitative method but general method that can be used any kind of data according to Glaser. However, although working with probabilities, most GT studies are considered as qualitative since statistical methods are not used and figures not represented. The result of GT is hence not reporting of facts but probability statements about the relationship between concepts or an integrated set of conceptual hypotheses developed from the empirical data. Validity in its traditional sense is consequently not an issue in GT, which instead should be judged by fit, relevance, workability, and modifiability. Fit has to do with how closely concepts fit with the incidents they are representing, and this is related to how thoroughly the constant comparison of incidents to concepts was done. Relevance. A relevant study deals with the real concern of participants, evokes, captures or attention, and is not only of academic interest. Workability. The theory works when it explains how the problem is being solved with such variation. Modifiability. A modifiable theory can be altered when a new relevant data is compared to existing data. A GT is never right or wrong, it just has more or less fit, relevance, workability, and modifiability, and readers of paper 5 are asked to judge its quality according to this principle. The goal of a GT is to discover the participants' main concern and how they are continually trying to resolve it. The questions of you keep on asking in GT are what's going on and what is the main problem of the participant and how they are trying to solve it. These questions will be answered by the core variables and its subcores and properties in due course. If your research goes in accurate descriptions, and another method should be chosen since GT is not a descriptive method. Instead, it has the goal of generating concepts that explain people's actions regardless of time and place. The descriptive parts of GT are there mainly to illustrate the concept. We can now go back to our discussions of the three kinds of coding in grounded theory. Open coding. Open coding refers to close examination of the data so that the phenomena may be named and categorized. An observation, a sentence, a paragraph from an interview transcript is taken apart and given a name which stands or represents the phenomena. We ask questions like what is this? What does it represent? On the way, we make comparisons so that similar phenomena may be given the same name. Suppose you are doing a study how children play together. You see one child pulling away a toy from another and you label it as a grabbing. You may then observe another child hiding her toy, and third is avoiding interacting with the others in order to protect his toys. Now you can go on endlessly labeling, but this will get you nowhere. You have to start grouping your concept together as categories. You may ask yourself what is the grabbing, hiding, and avoiding represent, and come to the conclusion that these are all strategies to avoid sharing a toy. After generating categories, Stratos and Corbin recommend that their properties be identified and then dimensionalized, that is located along a continuum in order to define the content more precisely. Let us look at the categories of color. Its properties include shade, intense hue, and so forth. Each of these properties can be dimensionalized, that is, they vary along the continuum. This color can vary intensely from high to low, in hue from the darker to lighter, and so forth. There are various ways of doing open coding. Stratos and Corbin recommended analysis, the first interview, line by line, so that the concepts and contraries are freely generated. Subsequently, this can be done paragraph wise and or in terms of entire document or case. It is important not to lose touch with the aims of coding, namely breaking down and understanding a text in order to generate categories which can be used for comparing. The result of opening coding should be a list of codes and categories written alongside the text itself, along with the code notes that explain the content of the codes. Memos which contain observations on the material and your thoughts about it also go a long way in developing grounded theory. Axial coding. The next step is to refine and differentiate the categories generated in open coding. Those categories are selected which hold out promise for further development. Stratos and Corbin suggested a coding paradigm which is given in the figure below. A. Causal conditioning. B. Phenomenon. C. Context. D. Intervening condition. E. Action interaction strategies. F. Consequences. This figure 27.2 is coding paradigm as per Stratos and Gog. In axial coding, categories are developed in terms of the causal conditions that give rise to the phenomena, location of the phenomena in terms of its properties, the context, the action and interaction strategies used to handle, manage, respond to the phenomena with regards to the context and the consequences of any action or interaction that is taken. In axial coding, the categories are most relevant to the research questions are selected from the developed codes and the related codes note. Many different passages in the text are then sought as evidence of these relevant codes. Selective coding. The third step, selective coding, continues the axial coding at a higher level of abstraction. It aims at laying bare the core category around which the other categories can be arranged. In other words, it reveals the story of the case. The story of the case is to be set down before developing the case story, the storyline. And see box number 27.5 on identifying a story. Okay, you will note that the coding approach is essentially an inductive one. From studying the context, content and the meaning of the text, the researchers use his or her interpretive abilities to formulate code and categories, takes them to a higher level of abstraction, and then construct a story or an account which is applicable to the whole data. The researcher is able to say under these conditions, this is what occurs. Under this condition, this is what occurs. Okay. So, box number 27 point, identifying the story from Stratos and Corbin. The following examples have been taken from Stratos and Corbin using data collected by Corbin. Corbin studied about how 20 women with chronic illness managed their pregnancies. The women she studied had illness like diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, and lupus erythematosus. While interviewing these women, Corbin came to realize that what an active role they played in managing their high-risk pregnancies. The story she identified is as follows. The main story seems to be about how women with pregnancies complicated by chronic illness manage the risk they perceive to be associated with their pregnancies. Each pregnancy or illness can be said to be on course, indicating that the risks are being managed, or off course, indicating that they are not. Women are managing the perceived risk in order to have a healthy baby. This desired outcome seems to be the primary force of motivating them to do whatever is necessary to minimize the risk. However, they are not passive recipients of care but play a very important role in the management process. They not only are responsible for monitoring their illness and pregnancies at home, but also make very active decisions about the regimens they are told to follow. In the later case, they consider the harm that might come to the baby from procedures like amniocentesis or from taking high doses of certain medications while pregnant. They carefully weigh the risk and make a judgment about the right thing to do. If they think the doctor is wrong, then they do what the women think should be done. Let us now move on to another technique of formatting and processing data, namely qualitative content analysis. Before reading about qualitative content analysis, let us complete Reflections and Action 27.2. Reflections and Action 27.2. Glaser and Strauss grounded theory supports a generalist approach to social research and does not like any preconceptions about theoretical formulation of research. Such an approach has a clear processing of coding. You need to read section 27.6 carefully and provide examples of the three types of coding from your own mini research project. 27.7 Qualitative Content Analysis. Content analysis is one of the classical procedures for analyzing textual material, be it interviews or media products. It differs from coding in the sense that rather than generating categories from the data themselves, it uses categories brought from the outside and fits the empirical material against them. of course, modifying the categories wherever necessary. The aim of qualitative content analysis is to produce the material so as to make it manageable. The following material down from descriptions of the techniques of qualitative content analysis is based on the work of Peter Mehring 1983 on the experience of teachers regarding teaching. Summarizing content analysis. Here the material is paragraphed, that is omitting less relevant passages of those having the same meaning reduces it. First reduction. Similar phrases are summarized together. Second reduction. Thus the material become more coherent, economical and manageable. It is a kind of editing of the material in order to draw out its essence. Applicative content analysis. This work in the opposite way. Here the statements which are puzzling, contradictory or unclear are explained or clarified by keeping in mind their context or by looking for cues in other parts of the text that would help make their meaning clear. Structuring content analysis. Here the researchers look for the type of formal structures in the material by applying categories that emerged at the stage of formulating the research questions itself and organizing the material accordingly. Thus, qualitative content analysis helps the researchers to reduce to manageable level larger masses of text using a uniform scheme of categories, which also helps in the comparison of different cases to which it is applied throughout. See box number 27.6 for examples of qualitative analysis. Box number 27.6, the examples of qualitative content analysis. The following examples are quoted by Flick and pertaining to data gathered by Peter Mehring on the experience of teachers regarding teaching practice. Example, summarizing content analysis. From an interview with an unemployed teacher, the statement and actually the quite the reverse. I was very keen on finally teaching for the first time is paraphrased as a quite the reverse, very keen on practice, and generalized as rather looking forward to practice. The statement, therefore, I already waited for it to go to the seminar school until I finally could teach there for the first time, is paraphrased as waited to teach finally and generalized as looking forward to practice. Owing to the similarity of the two generalization, the second one then is skipped and reduced with the other statement to practice not experienced as shock but as a big fun, thus skipping those statements that overlap at the level of the generalization reduces the source text. Examples of explicative content analysis. In an interview, a teacher expressed her difficulties in teaching by stating that she, unlike successful colleagues, was no entertainer type. In order to find out what she wishes to express by using this concept, first, the varied definitions of entertainer are assembled from two dictionaries. Then the features of the teacher who fit these descriptions are sought from the statement made by the teacher in the interview. Further passage is consulted. Based on the descriptions of such colleagues included in this passage, an explicating paraphrase can be formulated. An entertainer type is somebody who play the part of an extroverted, spirited, sparkling and self-assured human being. This explanation is assessed again by applying it to the direct context in which the concept was used. Before we end Unit 27, we need to complete the last reflections and action exercise in order to check if you have fully grasped the idea of content analysis. So, reflections and action 27.3. According to Seren Dacos, content analysis entails similar steps as any other method of research. This means that it includes selecting the area of research, designing the research, gathering data and analyzing them. The content of each step separates content analysis from the other methods of research. The content analysis analyzes the content. It may be qualitative or quantitative of documents, books, journals, and other kind of written text. The content in such an analysis may be explicit or implicit. An example of content analysis is the study of television serials to find out why certain categories of people continue to watch particular shows without missing a single episode. Can you give at least 5 more examples of studies which can use the method of content analysis to discover attitudes, motives, and values of subjects of research? 27.8 Conclusion. Unit 27 has sought to acquaint you with some important techniques of analyzing and interpreting your data. However rich and interesting your data, they will make sense only if they are rigorously analyzed and cogently presented. The approach of Stratos and Corbin exemplifies how we can proceed step by step to integrate masses of data into a tightly woven, grounded theory which will help to explain and predict reality. Qualitative content analysis demonstrates how pre-existing categories can be imposed upon data in order to select and edit what seems irrelevant and unnecessary so that the key research questions may be addressed and understood. Further reading, we have from David Silverman, Interpreting Qualitative Data, Methods for Analyzing Text and Interaction. The another one is from Royce A. Singleton and Bruce C. Straits, Approaches to Social Research. So this is the end of the Unit 27. Thank you.